Hi there and welcome. Really excited, looking forward to today's conversation. We're going to be hearing today about mobilizing climate finance, which is a very relevant topic now with COP26. Very excited to have with me here today two experts in the field, Katja Silva-Leander, the Director of DAI's Development Finance and Investment Practice, and Robin Young, who is also with DAI and working on a USAID Invest project. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from both of their extensive experiences today. So maybe I can just start with where you would see the role of the private sector joining and taking part, and how exactly can they get involved?
Yeah, so because there's a big need, but there's also a big financing gap. So they've estimated that there's a 1.6 trillion financing gap annually in order to reach the Paris Agreement targets. So a lot of that financing at the moment is coming from the public sector, from governments and donors. But in order to really, but so far we haven't been able to reach the targets in terms of financing. In order to reach the large amounts of the trillions that we actually need to reach these targets, there's a huge need to attract private capital. And private capital is really the only way to be able to scale up the climate finance needs to a state where sufficient financing is going into both rich and developing countries to reach these targets, and also to help developing countries to adapt and cope, increase their resilience to cope with the adverse impacts of climate change.
Thank you. And Robin, maybe I can ask you to give us a little bit of your experiences in the field of how these projects work, and how private capital can be mobilized for climate finance. If you might have a couple of examples from the ground.
Sure. Well, on USAID Invest, we work around the world with different USAID missions, bureaus, and operating units. And they basically engage with Invest to mobilize private capital for a diversity of development objectives. We've seen increasingly a lot, for example, in the renewable energy sector. And so this is both to address the access to energy needs that residences and businesses have, and increasingly, the economics align also for it to be in renewable energy. So depending on the markets, we've seen it in wind energy, we've seen mini grids, we've seen solar home systems. So different types of energy solutions. And as far as how we are working with them, it also depends a bit on the stage of the businesses or the projects. So for example, one of the early projects we had under Invest was in East Africa, where there were a number of companies that were already in a growth mode, both with solar home systems, so small systems for residential households for the basic electricity needs, as well as mini grids. And they were in a growth mode, raising capital. And so really to help speed that up and reduce some of the risks and information costs, USAID would come in and offset some of the costs for transaction advisory services to bring together these businesses with private capital that was interested to grow in these, or to invest in these growing markets. In other countries, for example, in Vietnam, where there's also a big push for renewables, in particular in wind, both onshore and offshore, to be able to attract, international investors with local developers as well to really help build that market. Often coming in for large projects with helping to buy down some of the information costs and ensure really high quality data, reliable on the engineering side, so that international investors will trust these investment opportunities that they're coming into. So those are two
Right. And
examples.
those are great examples. Are there any areas that you think are currently underfunded, where there's really an opportunity for the private sector to get in, maybe get in early?
Mhm.
Are there any of these growth opportunities that you can identify right now?
Yeah, so in the energy sector, it is a sector that I think we see, both the need because of the huge emissions that are coming from that sector, but also the private sector tends to get into it more. And so there's a more limited need to help buy down the cost there. But in other sectors, for example, in climate smart agriculture, which is hugely important given the number of people that still work in agriculture in a lot of these developing countries, as well as the both the impact that climate change can have on the sector as well as the emissions that can be generated. And so we are seeing a number of funds in this sector that really need support. And this is where we see, for example, donors like USAID can come in with catalytic capital to help buy down the risk, help these fund managers establish a first loss facility, and therefore help attract additional private capital into these sectors, which really do need it.
Great, thank you. And Katja, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that one of the discussions for the upcoming COP26 is that so far a lot of capital has been going into mitigation activities that help reduce emissions mostly. But there's a lot more capital needed for adaptation activities, which is to help countries adapt to any climate impact that has already happened, and not as much funding is going into that. I think they've estimated about only 20% of the funding so far has gone into that, as opposed to what's going into mitigation. So I think there's going to be a big call for action to invest more in adaptation.
Right. And I mean, maybe that's a good point to ask you there. If you could sort of quickly say what it is that you're hoping that the leaders from the G20, the COP26, what are you really looking for from them as we go into this next phase of trying to get the financing together to help with climate adaptation and mitigation?
Yeah, so the first one is exactly that, to channel more funds into adaptation and raise more funding commitments towards those types of activities. The other one is, and a major one actually, is the pledge that G7 countries made a few years ago to collectively raise $100 billion per year to help developing countries reduce their emissions, and also to help them cope and adapt to climate change impact. And so far, that 100 billion per year was meant to be met by 2020, and then was going to be, the pledge is to give 100 billion per year until 2025. And so far, that 100 billion per year has not been met. I think the highest so far has been 80 billion, which took place in 2019. And so far, the estimates are that in 2020, that 100 billion wasn't met either. So COP26, that's one of the key pillars that they want to achieve, is to get that commitment from the G7 countries to make sure that the 100 billion are met, and also, in addition, to hope to agree on additional investment on top of the 100 billion per year, because that's not even going to be sufficient. We're needing to mobilize trillions of dollars rather than billions.
Right. Thank you, Katja. Yeah, I think that's really a very good place to leave it, because there's really this need for the private sector to get involved, but the governments need to also continue to step up and make sure that they're meeting their commitments. I want to thank you both, Rob and Katja, for speaking with me today. I learned a lot, and best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.